let's jump into the meeting today. If you haven't added your name to the list of the attendees, please do so. This gives us an idea of who's been regularly attending. So I'll pause here. We have the agenda before us. It's copied from last week's agenda and slightly updated. But if there's something you want to add to that, feel free to chime in now or to tag it into the appropriate section or add it to the any other business section at the end. So I'll just pause if there's something somebody wants to bring up right off the bat. We don't have any lightning talks scheduled right now. We've got one that we're tentatively targeting for February, but if there is a lightning talk you'd like to give to this community, please reach out and we'll get that scheduled in as soon as possible. Take a quick look at the recent user-raised issues. I was all set to say there hasn't been any for a little bit, but now I see that we've had one come in just half an hour ago. It's like a Minecraft crash. Hopefully somebody on the JIT team can take a look at this. I realize it's just come in, but with the XJIT options, it's likely going to be JIT related, I guess.
I'll make sure it gets tagged appropriately and appropriate people pinged.
Thanks, Peter. And none of the rest of these have come in, or there's nothing else relatively new anyways. Is there anything here that needs a discussion right now? Jump back to the agenda. And if we take a look at our 0.30 release, down to sort of the last three items, two of which are updating OpenSSL. Last week when we talked about this, Adam or Peter, one of you indicated that I think it was only Windows where we were slightly delayed on getting the update. Is that still the case?
Right. Yeah. So I think what's happened is when we do the Semru, when IBM does the Semru builds, it's going to use the new version, but we haven't updated the open machines to have the new version for Windows yet.
We have an idea of when that'll happen?
We'd have to ask Adam. I don't think Adam's on the call because he wasn't supposed to be available this morning. Soon, but because the release itself is going to have the right version, I don't think we have a concern for the release.
This is more of an infrastructure issue than a code or a scripting issue, correct?
But it's making sure we get the right version of OpenSSL into the Semru builds. So any open source testing is going to be using an older version of OpenSSL, but the IBM testing, I think, already uses the 111M, and the release builds that IBM creates is going to use 111M.
Okay, but there's no scripting updates that need to be done to tell the build to use the 111M. So somebody else picking this up to build on Windows either needs to have installed the library correctly on their system, and that's the key piece. Do I have that right?
So some platforms rely on the OS to provide OpenSSL. So if you're using Linux, for example, you just get OpenSSL, whichever one you happen to install. So it's up to the user to keep it up to date. There's certain platforms that ship OpenSSL. Mac ships OpenSSL, but we build it along with the rest of the build. So Mac is going to download the 111M source, build it, and include it in the build. Windows, for some reason, we never got the build working for OpenSSL, so we have to build it manually. There is a scripting change to get the open source builds to use 111M when we're ready.
Is somebody looking into getting the Windows builds to build it alongside the VM like other platforms do?
No, nobody's looking at that. That would be a big help if we got that working, because then we wouldn't have this manual step that we have to do all the time.
Right. Is there an issue open?
Oh, probably something ancient from years and years ago.
Yeah, well, I'll have a look, and maybe with Adam we can get that done.
Yeah, my concern for the 0.30 release is that the open source version is pointing to or whatever scripting we have in place is pointing at the correct version for platform. So it sounds like Windows is still the only one where I'm not sure I understood the answer.
Yeah, so Windows is not going to be pointing at the correct version. It'll point to an older version, and it'll use that older version in all the open source testing. But IBM also runs builds, and IBM is the one who creates the summary release builds, and those builds are using 111M.
I think it's great that IBM's got the right setup. Just worried about tagging a release that, from an open perspective, is pointing at the wrong level of OpenSSL.
It's strange because the thing that we're updating is the instructions to Jenkins. Somebody would have to be duplicating our Jenkins environment exactly in order to use those instructions.
Okay, so it's not a build or configuration piece that's versioned with the code. It's infrastructure.
Yes.
Well, the code is still in OpenJ9 though, right?
Code is in OpenJ9, but it's Jenkins build instructions.
Sorry, I just got on. When did you want to tag?
We hadn't gotten there. We were looking at the list of open items still for the release and trying to figure out how far we were away from having the Windows version updated in the open to point to the right 1.1.1m.
Yeah, so if we need to do it quickly, I can put it out quickly. I was working on a change to have it done automatically from now on, so that's why I hadn't done it yet.
I think if we can get it done so the release points and tags the correct version that matches, that the open tags point at the same thing that we would hope the open builds are shipping, it would be happy with that. That would be the best outcome of this.
Yep.
So you think that would be possible to get sorted out in the near term, Adam?
Yeah, I can have it rolled out today if we need it today.
That would be super. Pete, do you know what the state of the Mac OS X dump issue is?
Just that we don't have a fix for it, but I'm going to propose that we don't let it hold up our release. So it means that if we're running on Mac OS 12, something goes wrong, we're not going to get a core dump, so there'll be no service. But holding up the entire release for that seems like something that doesn't need to happen. I suggest that we go ahead with the release, and if we get a fix for this at a reasonable time, then maybe we do a new release to include it. Or alternatively, we have something, we have a release. We have something we could give people, if they run into this problem, we say, please use this build, and then you can get a core file.
I tend to be a laggard when updating my Core OS. So my Mac is on 11. Do we have any idea of how common 12 is versus 11 versus 12, or?
I don't know, but this was opened by a user. So a user did update their system and then run into this problem.
This applies to core file generation in general, not just JDump.
Correct. If you try to generate the core file, we've rewritten the code to generate the core file on Mac. We're not relying on the OS to do it, and that code that we've written doesn't work on OS X 12.
And the failure mode on this is a hang when the core
I don't think
file.
this one hangs. Scroll up. There's a different problem where we have a hang. We already moved that one forward. So you get an error when you try to do the dump. Did it?
I'm seeing starting infinite hang.
Yeah, maybe it does hang.
Okay, sorry, no, the class is called hang because they're just waiting for something they're never notifying. The application hangs deliberately so that they can sure they can get the dump.
Yeah, I think the dump just fails, and then the JVM, depending on if it's a user requested dump or if you got a segfault or something, then I guess the JVM will terminate.
Yeah, it seems like something we could document with an errata out of the release. I would be on board with that plan.
Yeah, and when we have a fix, we'll discuss what to do with it.
Just take a note in here for a second.
You're putting your errata, but I think we just add it to the release notes.
Thank you.
I think there's an issue for known problems in the release notes. Space for it already.
Okay. So that basically takes us through the 030 release items. Which means we're pretty close to ready to start the actual builds then.
Right, so we're waiting for OpenJDK to release. And then we'll have to run the merge jobs and see if we have any merge conflicts and if we encounter any problems.
Yep, and if there are any security fixes that need fixing afterwards, they'll have to be merged in as well.
Right, there's a couple of security fixes for OpenJ9 that need to go out.
So we're getting close to that final tag to go very soon then. That's good to hear. Anything else?
In theory, it could happen tonight, but maybe we won't rush this one and hold off and make sure we have everything in place.
Sounds wise.
Big thanks to Daryl. Big thanks to Daryl for going through all the DID issues that were in the milestone last week and justifying how we could move them out. And there was one fix that was released yesterday, so it hasn't had a lot of time to soak.
With the ones.
Go ahead, Dan.
No, go ahead, Daryl.
I was just going to tell Pete that I'll likely merge that 0.30 PR later this morning.
I think I did it already.
Oh, did you?
You had already approved it, so I looked at it and approved it and merged it.
Okay, I missed that. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll echo Pete's comments as I thank you for going through the items. Do we have a sense of how many of the items that we had marked as blockers we were able to resolve, or how many we moved out?
On the JIT side, we resolved one, and we moved the other one out. But it seems to fail fairly frequently in the builds, but when you get down to diagnosing it, it's a bit harder to reproduce. But that just means that we're going to keep the focus on getting to the bottom of it. We're not going to keep pushing it down the line.
It's good to hear. Daryl, is there anything else we wanted to call out around 030?
Just before we jump too far into 031, I will mention that everything we move forward, we move to 032. And the only things left in the 031 milestone are those specific to JDK 18. So we do have to keep an eye on the 032 milestone and the blockers in there as well. They could very well impact Java 18, but they're not specific to 18.
Subs, so I have a second in the plan. This is shoes. Pete, is there a reason not to move those blockers from 32 to 31 at this point if we believe they affect 18?
Well, we've already moved them forward, which means, if they didn't really block 030, even though I'm not sure blocker is really the appropriate label. It just happens to be the one we pay attention to. Maybe the better label is high priority. We want to get them resolved because they fail often, but they didn't hold up our 030 release, so they're not going to hold up our 031 release. And they're not specific to 18, and I wanted to have the list of things that were specific to 18 so we can make decisions on when we're branching and if we can ship on time, that kind of thing.
Yeah, then I guess that's a good point, that blocker is not really the label we want. Just a little concerned we end up with enough of these high priority items that we've pushed forward, what the quality for 18 will be.
Well, I'm hoping we still have focus on some of these things that have moved forward. I think people are looking at them, so I hope they continue to look at them, even though they moved to the 032 milestone.
Let's take a quick look at the 031 milestone just to see where we're at there. Are any of these marked as blocker at this point?
I think there's just one. There's a crash that happens fairly frequently on Mac and on Z-Linux. So it happens when you're compiling the tests. If you get through compiling the tests, then the tests run and pass. But quite often, there's been times when I've restarted compilation 6 times and it just fails every single time. Now, the latest is that's related to the shared cache. So if you clear the shared cache, then you have a good chance of getting through the tests. But if you have a bad shared cache, it's going to fail every time. And there's something new that I haven't created an issue for yet, but we're running some Sanity OpenJ9 testing yesterday, and all of a sudden we started getting a lot of crashes. They didn't seem to happen earlier, but sometime yesterday they started crashing. I think it's crashing in the JIT, and I'm going to have to open an issue today and get somebody to look at it, but we can no longer get through the Sanity OpenJ9 test without crashing quite a bit. So I'm concerned that something got delivered that is causing this problem in the last day or two.
That's interesting. Because anecdotally, in the last day or two at the Adoptium on our test machines, we're running out of space. And I've asked someone this morning to look to see if there are test jobs running that have large core files that are causing it to happen within a day.
And that would include OpenJ9 testing?
Yeah.
I was wondering if something was going to show up in the nightly bills last night, but 8, 11, and 17 all looked fine. So whatever's happening, it seems to be specific to 18 and probably 19.
Okay, that's good to know.
We still don't have a tentative schedule for 031. Did we want to start to firm that schedule up at this point, or are we still comfortable with a very loose target of January 29th for the initial branch?
There are still quite a few problems, so if we do go ahead with the branch on the 29th, might be a lot of double delivering going on.
So it sounds like we're on a week by week re-examination of that date.
Yeah, I'm starting to see some fixes going in. There's issues with the UTF-8 by default. One or two fixes for that got merged in today. So if we can fix the crash that's happening and get an updated status of where we're at, that might help us decide if we can branch on the 29th.
So I guess we'll revisit this again next week and see what state we're in.
Yeah.
Anything else to call out for the 031 release?
Nope.
Let's take a look at the regular updates. Shelley, is there an update from Adopt?
No, just to say we're preparing for a release to start tomorrow, and hope that it goes smoothly. I can update this with tracking items. If I might have done it last week. One other note, I guess, more LAN, probably already mentioned. CanOSP, another kickoff starts Friday. So we're going to have 7 students. I think we may have one of the students take a look at functional tests in OpenJ9, but we'll see after the code sprint on the weekend.
Thanks, Shelley. Adam, is there an update on infrastructure?
Much to report. We are still working on the new AX machines. We hopefully will start adding them by the end of the week. So we're cloning them out soon.
So there is something that fails on those new machines, I think, and the one we have is disabled.
That's a 7.1, right?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. I'll have to double check because I can't recall off the top of my head what that was. But I know they've been working on 7.2 lately. There was an issue with those as well, but that was just in the compile, which we don't normally compile in 7.2. But follow up with. Go ahead.
The issue we have is on the machine P8 Java 1 IBM 04. Don't know if that's 7.1 or 7.2.
It should be 7.1.
And our test RAS API is always failing on that machine. And Joe doesn't know what's wrong. He's asked for help. I haven't gotten around to taking a look yet.
And that's a compile problem or a test problem?
I think it has something to do with core dumps. But all the other core dump tests are working. I'll have to take a closer look to see what's wrong.
Right.
Thanks, Adam. Do we have an update on CMake?
Nothing really new to report there. Still working through some cross-compile stuff that should be closed up pretty soon.
Marius, is there an update on JIT server?
No, nothing important.
MicroJIT?
27th.
27th. Thank you. Toby, is there an update on Snapshot Restore?
Nothing new to announce this week.
Jack, is there an update on the Loom efforts?
There's nothing much new to be announced this week.
Jang, is there an update on Panama?
Not much. Still keep upping the code change and test case against the second incubator.
I am tempted to take this monitoring strategy issue off the agenda. We haven't gotten to it for a long period of time. It doesn't seem like we're going to get to it here. Any objections or concerns with that?
Do we know who added it?
I believe I did originally.
I don't have a
Due to
concern. What were you going to say?
I was going to say there was a request about JFR support, I believe, or question around what our strategy there was. Mark provided an answer at that time, said we would try and follow up on it, but it looks like it's not high enough priority to be followed up on, so I don't think it's worth dragging through the agenda every week.
I think there is some background activity happening there slowly.
Glad to hear that. I'm not aware of any details there. So
Yeah, I
Is
think
that
we're just waiting for somebody to take a look at what possibilities there are other than JFR and give us an update on that.
all right? Then I will leave it potentially just as a reminder that might be worth checking in on again next week.
Yeah, I don't know that it's going to be happening that quickly. I think it would be fine to take it off, and if it pops up again, we can discuss it.
Daryl, anything to call out on the M1 work?
We've started manually running some of the tests just to see how things go. We found some problems that we're working around, so we have a couple of fixes in flight. So once those tests can go smoothly, then we'll look at enabling testing in the nightly builds. So I think at this point we are still on track for an early access release for 0.31.
Good to hear. Is there anything else that we need to discuss today? All right, then thanks everybody. We'll call the meeting here.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.